Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is an unusual kitchen time. I've been asked by several people, and I get asked on and off, mostly following a kitchen session involving a mount, is what knots do I use and how do I tie them? This is not a definitive list of knots. There are many types of knots you can use. I use these because they're simple and they do the job I'm asking them to do. So with a mount, you often hear me refer to tying a slip knot. There's a good reason for it being a slip knot, because it does slip until it grips and then it binds tight. Okay, so to do a slip knot, let's make sure I'm in the camera somewhere so you can see what I do. Make a loop. So I'm going to choose right hand and left hand. If you're left-handed, tough, you'll have to reverse it. Make a loop first. That's going to be the bit that goes around the mount. And you notice that the loop needs to have the right hand side from the right hand on top of the left hand side. And then with your loose end here, which I suggest you have plenty long enough because you're going to need that later. So don't have a little short stubby one because you'll come into difficulties later. I'll explain. Okay, so over the top, right hand over left hand. That gives you a cross. Then take your loose end, that's the bit on the left, over the top, up through the loop you made, and down through the new loop you've just made. Like that. And effectively what you've done is tie a knot. That's all you've done, is tie a knot round a loop. Yeah? But this bit will move. So you can put it on your mount and pull your long end nice and tight and it'll grip. And then you can go round and round your mount and round your roots, leaving this end. Remember I said at the beginning, leave yourself a nice end, wrap round as many times as you like, and then when you come to tie off at the end, when you've finished, you've got something to tie onto. Yeah? And the knot I use is a reef knot because it doesn't slip and it doesn't come undone. And it's very simple to remember. It's right over left, left over right. So right over left, up through and tie a knot. Yeah? And then left over right and tie a knot. And it makes a very pretty pattern. Yeah? And it pulls tight and it won't work loose. Yeah? So that's those. Now, with fishing line, getting them undone again is a whole different ball game, and I would suggest a pair of scissors because once these knots are tied in fishing line, they don't like coming undone. Okay, so that's the sort of thing you could do for a mount. Other things you might need to tie is like when you're staking up flower spikes or staking up long canes or something. This is useful for attaching whatever you're going to tie with to your stake. Now this is just a double loop. So again, right hand over left hand, make a loop. Hold it with your left hand. And then do it again. Make another loop, exactly the same. Yeah? And then the second loop goes under the first loop. That can now go over your stake, and when you pull it, it knots against itself. And you've now got two long ends to go round your canes and mess about and do all that sort of stuff. Yeah? Round and round your canes and stuff like that till you end up with two ends. And then again, whether you do right over left or left over right, just make sure you do the opposite with your second knot. So this time I'm going to go left over right, but then right over left. As long as you do the opposite, you'll get that magic pattern that pulls tight. Yeah? I'll show you another one. This is useful because obviously all of these knots have got something to pull against. You will have times this one's a nuisance to get undone when you pull it tight. That's the whole point of it. It hangs onto your stake so that while you're doing all your other stuff it doesn't move or slip. You will often find times when you're tying in air and you haven't got something to pull against. Okay, so going back to our original knot, right over left, yeah, that will slip, yeah, it will move. But if you go round again, so starting from scratch, right over left, and then go round again, yeah, that has a tendency not to slip. And then you can complete the knot with the opposite. So if you started with right over left, then go left over right. And it forms a more complex knot that is very, very not inclined to slip. So that's useful for tying in air, when you've got nothing to pull against, apart from what you're tying with. Okay, I'll go over them again. If you want to attach to a stake, I mean, you can just wrap it round and tie a knot, but loop number 1, loop number 2, second loop under the first loop, and it ties tight. Okay, that's that one. The slip knot, make a loop, yeah, make sure that your top piece from your right hand is over the top, yeah, so it crosses over the top, and then go round, up through that loop and down through there, and make sure you've got a long enough end to use later, and that's a slip knot. Yeah, you can put that over your mount, preferably first before you put your plant on, and don't forget, or people tell you off, and then that will pull quite tight. And then once you've gone round your mount, you've got a nice loose end. Now I did say right over left, left over right, but it doesn't matter which way you do it, and I'm often the opposite way round when I get to tie off on a mount, so it would be left over right and then right over left. But as long as you end up with that nice patterned knot that looks quite pretty, it'll grip and it won't come undone. So those are they. That's what I use, and I don't use anything else. Oh, by the way, with a slip knot, I bet this doesn't work. If you pull a slip knot right through, it comes undone. So obviously if it wasn't against something, round something when you pulled it, you'd end up with nothing. Yeah, so you tie your slip knot, yeah, and unless you put something in here for it to pull against, yeah, like that, if there's nothing there, it just pulls apart. So that's the knots I use and why I use them and where I use them. And this is now the definitive knot video, so anybody asks about knots can go straight to this one. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I've used a reasonable bit of cord so you hopefully can see what I'm doing, and I've talked the actions through. But a lot of these knots, it's important, you know, which bit's on the top, which bit's on the bottom. That's what, it's visual, and I've done the words, so hopefully everybody can understand that. Now try them with fishing line and wet hands, and good luck with that. See you next time. And just to keep you up to date, my new fan arrived, and as if by magic, you have to have some luck sometimes. It can't always be bad luck. I went onto eBay and just put in 8-inch extractor fan, and right near the top of the list was the exact same make and model that I already had. And this is a real bonus because basically the front just unclips, yeah, and underneath are 4 screws that hold the whole thing in place. So it was a matter of take the front off, undo the 4 screws, disconnect the cable and reverse the process, and it's up and running. So it took me like 2 minutes to replace the fan. But if I'd had a different make and model, the screw holes wouldn't have lined up, and maybe even the hole in the wood wouldn't have been the right size. The only faffing I had to do is this is the type of fan that has a pull cord, yeah, and it's got spring loading against the little flaps at the back. Oh, I don't want to put my hands through, I might break the thing. But once the fan starts and pushes the air, the little flaps at the back open to let the air out, and they just flop down again with gravity. But on the fan in its original state, they're spring loaded with a pull cord which is on like a clicker. So all I did was take the springs off. That makes the flappy bits just flap in the wind, basically. And made sure the fan was actually turned on with the pull cord, and then took the cord off, because I don't need an on-off switch on the fan. It's controlled by a thermostat. That's what turns it on and off. Yeah, so that's done, that's replaced. Just under £20, so not an absolute fortune. But I need it, you know, with this weather continuing, and it doesn't sound like there's any let up. I've got to get this heat out as best I can. And quite honestly, I could do with 2 of them at the moment, but I don't want 2 big holes in the grow room. Nothing much going on out here that's new. I did want to show this. This little pinguicula's got 2 flowers on, and these are incredibly attractive. Beautiful little blooms, and there's another one coming, doing its job, catching those dratted fungus gnats. There's another one, don't know whether that's just opening or just going over, one or the other. Oh, and there's another one opening down here, which this one looks like it's going to be pretty attractive as well, quite a deep purple possibly. Yeah, so there's nothing much going on, there's nothing new opening. One thing I will say is, although my Vandas are up there to get the best light they possibly can, I think they're burning. There's certainly damage on those purple blooms. Hang on, let's use the zoom as I've got one. Yeah, and I think they're just getting too hot near that roof. You can see there's some damage on some of those blooms, and the ones a bit farther away from the roof don't look quite so bad. The spike on the big white one, I don't believe they're going to open. I've got a feeling they're frazzled. And if you look at the, hang on, where am I walking? I don't want to walk into something. If you look at the orange one there, those top blooms are frazzled. Now, given that blooms on Vanda spikes open from the base upwards, the ones at the top of the spike are the newest blooms, and they're going over. So I think this is just continual heat, and it's just too much for some things. I haven't really got anywhere else to put the Vandas at the moment, so, you know, I'll have to just put up with this bit of damage this time round. They'll bloom again. I mean, there's enough blooms on that big purple one to be attractive, and there's still a couple of buds that may or may not open. They may be badly damaged such that they don't actually open, but we shall have to wait and see. They're the only things that are in a position, so there's no shade netting above them. Shade netting stops short. The reason being that in the UK, most of the time, I need that bright light. But the bright light at the moment is accompanied by intense heat. And obviously, although I've got air movement and circulating fans, it's probably quite intense just below that roof. And this is the first time this has happened, and it may never ever happen again, because we just don't get weather like this under normal conditions. We have a quick look at this while I'm here, the Catatanti. Still quite a lot of buds to come on this one. These seem to be opening okay. They're not suffering with the heat because they're far enough away from the roof that it doesn't matter. There's not much else. There really isn't much else. I've got an Arangus with some spikes on, that's to come. Oh, the Spring Dreamer pollen, what's left of it, because I gave away the larger part, has decided to open some buds. And this time round, hardly any pink on the tips. Yeah? Nowhere near as many as last time. It's not, it's more white. But what I like about these blooms when they open is that it's a lovely green in the centre. It's not yellow, it's green, but it does fade to a yellowish colour. So that's that. There's a nice little cluster there. 3 dendrobiums. That's a nobly type, Comet King, blooming on the Kiki. This is a primary cross in Fundibulum crossed with Lowii. I'm still after the species in Fundibulum because the blooms are very, very similar. The purest white, but they're bigger. They're larger blooms on the actual species. The Lowii that's gone into this, I believe, was used to get a much deeper colour in the lip than in Fundibulum on its own. But Lowii blooms are smaller, so it's actually reduced the bloom size, but intensified the colour. So that's probably why that cross was done. Yeah, that really is about it. There isn't much else. Oh, the two little bulbophyllums I'll film when they open properly. Yeah, and just the Hibiki has got a couple of blooms just starting to go on the very first cluster that opened. But these have been open a long time, these three main clusters, and there's quite a few more to come farther down in the plant, so it's still going to be open quite a while yet. So that'll do for this one, and I'm winning the battle with the ants. The ant population in here now is down to a couple a day, and they're probably just ones that I missed the day before, because they're getting less and less at quite a dramatic rate now. You know, they've gone down from like 30 a day to more like 3 or 4. And it could still be that a few are coming in from outside, but I think I've managed to eradicate them outside. So I think there's just a few lingerers in here that are hiding, you know, and then they move around and I eventually see them, and if I can, then I can get them. So we're down to lovely low numbers that I can live with now. So anyway, I'll see you next time. As I say, anybody who asks about knots in the future can be referred to this one. And hopefully the explanations were clear enough that people can replicate those quite easy. There's dozens and dozens of other knots you can use. You don't have to use those. Those are just the ones I've chosen because I find them easy. And they work. That's the other thing. They work. See you next time.